Alright, so welcome to the second rendition of Was Italy Ready for World War I? This one is being re-recorded with a camera. This originally was one of the first 6 that I posted, and I just think it deserves a camera. So, I don't know how many more of these I'm going to post before I go off to college. It is currently 10:53 on August 7th. Can't really see that well, but we're getting closer. I don't know how many more of these I'll be able to pump out before I... But either way, today's episode is going to be pretty good. It was good the first time. Hopefully it's better the second time. So, no nation was really ready for World War I. Like, you have Germany, which is somewhat ready. They've been mobilized for a while. They're somewhat out there. And France is, they're going. Russia's going as well. Like, they're both in somewhat okay positions. You have Britain that's kind of there. If the United States had joined in right at the beginning of World War I, we would have gotten curb stomped. We weren't ready in the slightest. And then you have below the United States, which has one of the worst militaries on the planet at the start of World War I. And then below them would be Italy. Italy was as far from ready as you could possibly imagine of being. You have, nations that are good with artillery and nations that are good with their population and they can recruit as many people as they need very quickly, nations that are good with their navy. Italy is in no category the best except for being the worst. Like, it is unimaginable how bad Italy was doing at the start of World War I. So it falls for a couple different reasons. And we're going to look at Italy pre-1915 and see what they were going through beforehand before we look at the outbreak of the war. So if you were to look at this, setup in Europe in 1913, you might think that Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary would be allied with each other. And if war breaks out, the three would fight alongside each other. And that's not how the war played out. It ends up with Italy fighting for the Allied side, but if things had gone a little bit differently, we're talking a matter of weeks, then we could have seen a completely different war. And this is because of the Triple Alliance. So Italy in the 1880s joins this Triple Alliance with Germany and Austria-Hungary, which at the time, Italy liked Germany. They did not like Austria-Hungary, but they liked them enough to get on speaking terms with them, mainly because of geography and military power. There's a couple different reasons, but basically it boils down to Italy doesn't like them. Austria-Hungary doesn't like them as well. So, two-way street. Now, this pact says, if Italy is attacked by France, Germany will come to their aid. If Germany is attacked by France, Italy will come to their aid. If Germany is attacked by France, Austria-Hungary will come to their aid. And if Austria-Hungary is attacked by Russia, Germany will come to their aid. But if any manner of fighting happens in Italy or Austria-Hungary, these two won't come to the other's aid. They have a non-aggression pact signed, which means that these two can take their troops off of the border of the other nation, knowing that there is this pact signed, so then they can relocate those troops elsewhere. Now, would it have been better if these two, had gone to war with each other should something happen? Maybe. But is the non-aggression pact better than nothing? Absolutely. So, this pact gets signed, and World War I breaks out. And on a technicality, Italy weasels its way out of this little pact. So, you have Austria-Hungary attacking Serbia. Russia then mobilizes, because they're allied with Serbia. As Russia is mobilizing, Germany sends a threat to Russia to stop mobilizing or they will declare war. Well, Russia keeps mobilizing, Germany declares on Russia, Russia and Germany are now at war, Serbia, Austria-Hungary, and Russia are now at war. It's this whole thing. And then, key point, and then, after the declaration between Germany and Russia comes down, Germany declares war on France, which means that Italy does not have to fulfill its agreement to fight against France with Germany, and it does not have to fulfill its agreement with the non-aggression pact against Austria-Hungary. So it just kind of stays there, and it stays neutral for the rest of 1914, because it managed to get out of the pact by, we're talking like a week of time. It is a very marginal amount of time that managed to weasel their way out of this pact. And that's how Italy gets set up for World War I. And the chain kind of breaks immediately. Like, as soon as they get out of this pact, relations between Germany Italy and Austria-Hungary kind of just dissolve, and it's really kind of interesting. But in this absence of allies for Italy, a couple other nations slide into Italy's DMs and pick them up. Now, Italy is alone. They're isolated. And they are kind of sitting there watching Austria-Hungary and Germany deal a big blow to Russia and France and then get a big blow brought back on them. And as they're sitting here, Britain approaches them in 1915 with an incredibly secret treaty. This is impossibly secret. And this treaty, called the London Treaty, would bring Italy into the war on the side of the Little Entente. And the treaty gives Italy a lot of things, and it is enough to entice Italy to join the war, even though they weren't ready in literally any manner. It is just appalling. So this map here shows what Italy looked like in 1914, and the light green spaces is all of the places that Italy will gain should they join the war with the Little Entente. Now, the Triple Alliance Pact will only give Italy a handful of these lands, but this new pact, the London Treaty, will give them all the land. So they're already, kind of ready to get into this pact and fight with, the Allies. But to spice up the deal, to make sure that Italy joins the war, France, Russia, and Britain come together and they say, okay, we're going to give them more things. So in addition to these lands, they are going to get naval assistance from France and Britain, as well as they also have to, give port to all of the other navies from France and Britain. But Italy's navy wasn't that bad at the outbreak of the war. Honestly, one of the only things Italy had going for it was the fact that they had a good navy. Did they utilize the navy well? No, but they had it. So they will also be given a £50 million loan from Britain in increments throughout the war to float its economy that was already in shambles. Italy's economy sucked at the outbreak of the war. They will also be given a share of Africa during and after the war. Now, the German Empire holds large swaths of land over in Africa, and once the Allies win, Italy will get a share in that, which they desperately wanted because Italy already controlled portions of Africa, so adding on to that, super beneficial from them. They will also get war reparations in equal proportion to their casualties in war effort. So if Britain loses 1 million troops and they get $10, and Italy loses 1 million troops, they will also get $10. Equal proportions. Now, in return, they only have to do 2 things. 1, they have to join the war immediately in full force, not some partial mobilization, full mobilization, full war economy, get on the border, and start attacking. And also, the treaty must stay a secret. Only 2 stipulations. April 26, 1915, this treaty is signed by the Italians. May 23rd, 1915, Italy is engulfed in war. We have just expanded the war drastically. Millions of more men have joined, and you would think that a brand new front that is extremely underprotected by the Austro-Hungarians being attacked by a large nation like Italy would collapse immediately. But no, they suck. The advance that Italy makes is just atrocious, and it just becomes another bogged down front for the rest of the war, and it is honestly one of the worst fronts of the entire war in terms of movement and also casualties. Now, Italy goes to war, and they draw up plans. They didn't really have any plans set to attack Austria-Hungary before the war either, which is just another generational fumble. But they draw up these plans, except the border isn't a nice, flat, open terrain like France or Russia. Italy has to deal with mountains that are just impossibly high. High enough that the front between Italy and Austria-Hungary can range anywhere from around 400 miles to several thousands of miles if you go based off of the altitude of the mountains. So if you go, oh, this is 1 mile, but then you account for the rise in elevation and then back down from that mountain, it could be 3 or 4 miles. Repeat that across this massive 400-mile border, and you can very easily see how we get to several thousands of miles of front. It is insane. This image here is one of the most interesting photos of World War I I've seen. It is a Italian soldier standing on the sides of the Alps, and you can just see how steep and desolate it is. You can just see forever. Now imagine trying to make the distance from where he's standing down the valley, up the next mountain, and then to, the other side. It would take just ages. And that's what Italy had to deal with. There really was only 1 or 2 places that Italy had flat area that they could attack with on a level like what you would see kind of over in Gallipoli, is what I would say. It's not flat like France for the most part, but it's definitely more mountainous, but it's not super duper mountainous. So they kind of fight on the same front for the entire war. Now, early mobilization for Italy goes about as effective as most nations. It is worse, though, for the most part. They get off their feet slower, their equipment is still not as good even later in the war, but it's just not great. I don't have anything else to say. So you have this massive equipment shortages across the entire Italian army, like abysmally bad. Bad enough that you have almost a 2-to-1 human equipment ratio. So for every, 1 human you can equip, you have 2 more that you can't. It is exceedingly bad. This image here is one of the worst images that I've seen out of the Italian front in World War I. Because you have a very hastily built trench, and you have a couple rifles on the right. You have a bunch of people in soft caps in the back, which is, what you would see early in the war, except the machine gun that the soldiers are standing around is a hand-cranked machine gun, which is incredibly outdated by the time World War I rolls around. But they are dusting these off and putting them into service because they have nothing else. Their hand-cranked machine guns is the best they have. They also do not have really many aircraft and artillery. You can count them in the tens at this point, which is incredibly important, especially when you're fighting, in places where you need reconnaissance like that. They also don't have a lot of knowledge on trench warfare or the equipment to really fight it should something happen. You have Russia and Germany and Austria-Hungary and France that have been dealing with these trenches for a year now. They have made equipment and they've made tactics and they've trained officers in how to fight in it. But Italy knows none of this. And now they're going up in seasoned vets of a year now trying to fight against them. And it really comes back to bite them later on as well. They have extremely short training of new soldiers. We are talking impossibly short training. Bordering on here's a gun, go march around the parade field, and when I can tell that you can march around the parade field and shoot a couple bullets, you can go. Not exactly like that, obviously, but it is extremely bad. And they have their version of the National Guard. It's more like the Reserve Guard, and they put their officers in a 2-month accelerated training program and put them on the front lines because they desperately need officers. It is just horrible. Now, at the time, they only have an incredibly small amount of military spending, but their industrial power was kind of comparable to Russia at the start of World War I, which sounds great, right? They don't really spend a whole lot on their budget, but their industrial power is just as big as the biggest nation on earth, except it still sucks. They don't really mobilize too well throughout the war. Their military spending goes up, but they don't really have a whole lot to spend anyway, and they kind of go into pretty bad debt. It's just not a good time for their, aviation branch. It's not a good time to be a soldier or an officer or be in the economy. Nothing about this is a good time for Italy in 1915. It's just terrible. Now, one of the other things that is just wild to me is Italy isn't very unified at the start of World War I. You have the German Empire, formerly Prussia, which has been unified for a while now, and they're, pretty homogenous now. You've got a pretty good grasp on it. And you have Russia, which is, pretty unified, same with France and Britain. Italy, though, really isn't in any aspect. The nation suffers from just an abysmal public school system, and it relies extremely heavily on local dialects, wildly heavily. And the further south you go as well, the worse it gets. And you also have even more dialects the further south you go. So if you are in the north, right next to the mountains, and you go to the next, former kingdom, you might be able to understand what they're saying. But if you go all the way to the south, it is a vastly different language. You will still be able to communicate basically, but not enough to fight with, It's just not good. In some places, recruits only made up about 50% of the literacy rates. It's wild. 50% of your soldiers in some of these regiments can't read a basic sign. And if you yell at them to do something, there's a chance they might not understand you because they come from a different dialect. And you have officers that also try to talk to each other, that also speak different dialects, so they don't understand each other. You have commands that can't understand each other because they're speaking dialects. If a soldier speaking to another soldier can't understand each other, that's not good. But if a commander talking to another commander in charge of thousands of soldiers' lives can't understand each other, now you're having a really, really bad job. And that's what Italy was dealing with. Now, logistically, Italy is just one of the worst off. Like, you just keep stacking stuff on. The worst off, the worst off, the worst off. And logistically, Italy is just way up there. They still rely extremely heavily on horses and mules to get most of their stuff, not even just military equipment, just most of their stuff around, because they don't have enough trucks or, trucks that are reliable enough to get them up the mountains. And their rail network kind of sucks when it gets to the mountains. You have a okay rail network that can get you from, the base of the mountains all the way to the southern part, which is fine. But the, rail network ends when it gets to the mountains, except the fighting is happening in the mountains. So you can't get anything from outside the mountains, inside the mountains without mules, except the mules can only go so far. And when the mules are trying to, carry huge artillery pieces up these massive mountains, they get hurt easily. They need to be fed a lot. They need to rest a lot. It is terrible. And the train issues combined with the mules, combined with the lack of trains and cars, just compounds and just cripples Italy extremely quickly. Like, logistically, they are horribly, horribly in a bad spot. Now, the main place that Italy fights at Caporetto and north of that in the Isonzo front is more flat, and their logistic issues are not necessarily as bad. They are comparatively much worse than most of France and most of Belgium, but it is a lot better than, say, some guy that's stationed near the Swiss Alps. Now, these three numbnuts are one of the worst parts of the nation. So, different portions of the government, in any government, would usually talk to each other. If the president of the US wants to do something, they usually should talk to the Senate or the House or, the chiefs of the Army or the Navy or whatever. If they want to do something, it gets spread around somehow. People know what's going on. Except the Treaty of London was kept secret not just from other nations, but from whole portions of the government. And not even like, this is the part of the government that controls environmental pollution. No, it's like, hey, guy that's in control of the army, we're going to war in 3 days. Do something. And it's just horrible. It's like they don't talk to each other at all. And even throughout the rest of the war, these portions of the government don't talk to each other. The army does something, and the army doesn't tell the Air Force, and the Air Force does something, and they don't tell, the person that's in charge of the budget. Nobody talks, and it just cripples an already crippled Italy. Now, you have, I'm going to butcher these really bad, Sidney Sinonio on the left and Antonio Salangia on the right. Now, these, with maybe a few extra people, are the only people to know about the Treaty of London. The Navy The army and everybody else has no clue what's going on. They have no clue this treaty is going on. The army kind of gets led on. They kind of get a little bit of time to prepare, but they don't know the full extent of what is happening, and they don't know when it's going to happen. They just know that maybe something's going to happen. Now, this guy on the screen is Luigi Cadorna, and I said that wrong too, but it's fine. This is the only guy in the army that knew about the treaty before it gets signed. And the worst part is that he couldn't act on it because of the secrecy of the treaty. So this guy that's in charge of the army knows we're about to go to war, we need to do something, but he can't mobilize any of his troops, and he can't place troops on the border, and he can't draw up plans, because if they do that, then the Austro-Hungarians will know that they're amassing for an attack, and then quickly rush troops back to the border. So you guys kind of sit there and wait to see what's going to happen. And this guy is also another major issue in the Italian, army for a different reason. Not because he's not allowed to do anything. Once the war kicks off, this guy can do pretty much anything he wants. It's because this guy is an idiot. This guy has no clue what he's doing. And on top of being an idiot and has no clue what he's doing, he's also restricted by the terrain. This guy sees the entire 400-ish mile front of Italy and Austro-Hungary. And you can't really attack with a large army through most of that because of the mountains. But he sees the Valley of the Isonzo. And he goes, okay, that's pretty flat. We're going to attack through there. And they try to attack through there. Right at the beginning, once this treaty is signed, it fails. So then they try again, a second time. There were a couple battles on the Western Front that were fought over 2 times. You had the 4th Battle of Ypres. 4 times is getting up there on attacking the same place, but, not completely unheard of. But no, this guy says, I know that we have failed 11 times to break through at the Valley of the Isonzo. But if we attack a 12th time, we're gonna get it. And that's how we get the 12 battles of the Isonzo before the Italians get absolutely swamped, just kicked down, and almost takes Italy out of the war at one point. And then the war ends and the Italians get all the land back. But this guy, atrocious, abysmal. You have Italians that hate this guy more than anybody else in the government because he just keeps throwing men into this grinder without doing anything. So it's horrible. Now, there is other things going on in the government, like the fact that the only party to accept the war was the current government. None of the other parties wanted to go to war. You also have Mussolini, who would become the leader of Italy during World War II, as part of these, one of these parties that doesn't want to go to war. And you have religion that, is widespread over Italy that also doesn't want to go to war. So you have the majority of the citizens that are against the war because their party is against it. And then you have the vast majority of Italians that are against it because of their religion. So this leads to extremely low levels of war support across Italy throughout the entire war. It is so low in some areas that you have hundreds of thousands of soldiers deserting or just never joining up throughout the war. The Italians made up this call to bring Italians home to fight for the Italian army. And there was just an untold number of Italians that never came back because they didn't feel like fighting. You have several shifts of government, major shifts of government, mid-war, because the Italians are trying to figure out what to do with themselves. They don't know what to do anymore. They're so embroiled in chaos and they're not unified. It is crazy just how bad the government was. Now, the last thing that is just really tying Italy from, really succeeding in this war is that they're already tied up in Africa. During World War I, you have Italy trying to fight unsuccessfully against the Austro-Hungarians. At the same time, they are unsuccessfully trying to put down elements of rebellion in mainly Libya. So the Italians hold Libya, Eritrea, and Somalia. Libya is in the north side of Africa, borders the Mediterranean. Somalia is down by the Horn. It's where all the pirates are. If you've seen the Tom Hanks movie about the Alabama, and I'm the captain now, that's by Somalia. Except they had conquered these not too long before the outbreak of the war. And you have this 3 going on 6-year war at the end, and you have all of these different colonies, 3 colonies, Eritrea, Somalia, and Libya, that are spread out from each other too. And they are holding down tens of thousands of troops because you have these rebellions. And to stop the rebellions, you need troops to put down those rebellions. So you have tens of thousands of troops tied down here when they could be over there. And you have to move equipment to them, equipment you don't have. You are already 2-to-1 outnumbered equipment wise. You can't really spare more for the people in Africa. And now you have to take convoy ships that could be used for trade, and now they're having to run to Africa to drop off supplies there. And now the army has to spread their attention between, the Italian and Austro-Hungarian front, and now the African front. And it's wild. They're going insane over in Africa. And this continues on post-World War I as well. Their problems don't get better through World War II. They never had a good time in Africa from World War I to World War II. And the average person really didn't like the wars in Africa pre-World War I. They really didn't. War support for the wars in Africa was already bottomed out. And then they immediately go from this war in Africa to the war in Europe. And you just don't have that war support that you never had in the first place. It bottoms out even more. You have mass desertion, people not showing up, so many different things. And Africa is just one giant black hole for the Italian army. Now, Italy would end up, winning the war. They were there at the Treaty of Versailles. They got their seat at the table, and they kind of got screwed over a little bit. By a little bit, I mean a lot. They weren't, given the territories in full like they were promised. There's all these other things. Their economy's completely screwed up. They have, millions of wounded, and the people are just up in arms about this. It's horrible. They don't even get a break post-World War I. It's really not until, the beginnings of World War II that the country's a little bit more unified. But even then, World War II doesn't go too well for the Italians either. They fracture off and start their own little civil war during World War II. It is not a good time for anybody. And to answer the question, no, Italy was not ready for World War I. I would say they were one of the least prepared nations for World War I. If you were looking at military might and equipment and readiness, you have Serbia, which is encircled on most sides by Austro-Hungary and other belligerents. They did more. They caused more casualties. They caused more of a ruckus. They held their own more against the Austro-Hungarians than Italy did. It is abysmal. So, no, not ready. So, hope you enjoyed it. Hope to see you guys in the next one.